I will pass the word to Liz Murray from Global Justice Now, our first speaker for today. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Joanna. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm hoping, can you hear me all right? Yep, good. Okay, and I'm just going to share my screen. Oops. And I'm going to try. Oh, what's going on here? I'm just going to stop sharing my screen actually for a moment. Sorry. Let me try that again. Oh, now my slides have vanished. Okay, let me just try that one again. Sorry, a slight hold up. Right, hopefully you can see you can see that all right now. Anyway, nice to see you all. I think
Liz, you need to
yes.
put it in display.
Okay, so I can't. Okay,
We're seeing
you're seeing my notes as well. Okay. Oh gosh, sorry.
Thank you, David. Yeah,
Yeah.
on display mode.
Whereabouts is
top left from the beginning, I think.
Yeah, that's what I did do. So you can see.
We see two screens.
You can see two screens like me. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I can't see on my screen how to change that to display. So let's try again. There's nothing here, is there? Right, I'm gonna Joanna, you have my slides, don't you? Why don't you go for it? Yeah. You just go for it. Sorry, excuse my incompetence.
No worries at all.
Too many things. There were too many things on my screen that meant I couldn't see what I needed to. I think to share that properly. Anyway, those of you who don't know who Global Justice Now are, we are a social justice campaigning organisation. We work on issues that we feel have an impact globally and particularly on the global south, but we look particularly at things that we can do here that will make a difference. We're very much an activist-based organisation as well. We've got local groups, active members and supporters across the UK. We have campaigns very much focused here in Scotland. So next slide, please. So I'm here to talk to you today about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I'm just going to call the Fossil Fuel Treaty from now on. So why it's needed and what we can do here in Scotland to make it happen. Next slide, please. So you probably don't need me to say why we might need to end the fossil fuel era, because it's really clear that at the root cause of the climate crisis is the burning of fossil fuels. This fossil fuels account for 75% of overall greenhouse gas emissions and 90% of carbon emissions. And as things stand, that the amount of fossil fuels being exploited is going to increase over time, and meaning that we won't be able to reach the 1.5 degrees C, the pathway consistent to staying below 1.5 degrees Celsius globally, which actually is looking very unlikely anyway, but it's even threatening the 2 degrees C pathway. And so governments have pledged net zero emissions targets for themselves, but even so, current plans would see increases in global coal production up until 2030 and in global oil and gas production until at least 2050, according to the United Nations Environment Programme. So even though we've got absolute clarity now on the climate, on the science of climate change, the reality is that it seems that no country wants to be the first to completely draw a line under fossil fuels, and everyone wants to extract the last barrel of oil. So next slide, please. where does that leave us? At the same time, actually, what we're seeing is a massive expansion in renewable energy. There's a new clean energy economy emerging. We're in the middle, really, or perhaps at the beginning, actually, of the biggest energy transition in human history. The amount of renewable energy added to the energy systems around the world grew by 50% last year. And renewables have just overtaken coal as the largest source of electricity generation. And at COP last year, there was a target agreed by governments to set to triple the amount of installed renewable energy generation capacity by 2030. And here in Scotland, quite a lot of the time, most, if not all, of our electricity is coming from renewables. And in fact, in January last year, and possibly since, I haven't been able to see all the data, but we generated the equivalent of 113% of Scotland's electricity from renewables last January, which means that we're also then obviously exporting it. So, so we are in a transition. But the key things are that it needs to be fast now, and it needs to be fair. So this is where global agreement is important. Next slide, please. How do we plan the end of fossil fuels? Well, you might think that the COP would be a place to get global agreement on fossil fuels, but it's got some really big drawbacks or some major limitations that mean that that's just looks like it has proved and will continue to prove impossible there. So it's very much focused on reducing emissions, which is really important, obviously. So it's focused basically on the downstream, what happens, but what happens on the sort of demand side, if you like, of the climate crisis, but it doesn't have a focus on upstream, on the supply side, which is and includes fossil fuels. And the words fossil fuels didn't even appear in any of the texts from the COP talks until Paris in 2015. And so that was after having started in the early 1990s. So we've had nearly 3 decades of climate talks at UN levels where fossil fuels have barely figured at all and been mentioned. Last year was the first time that fossil fuels were properly featured. And in the text, it said that there was an agreement to transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly and equitable manner. So that was a step forward, but there was no agreed plan or pathway to do that. So part of the reason for this is that the COP operates on a consensus process, which allows the fossil fuel producing countries to potentially block, well, anybody to block texts, but particularly those countries in this case. And often things are, as you'll be aware, are very slow and often end up going to the lowest common denominator. And the fossil fuel industry are very much present in the COP talks. So the next slide, please. So this was just an article very recently in The Guardian based on Oil Change International, looking at the delegate lists and for the COP in Azerbaijan that's going on at the moment, and seeing that more than 1,700 lobbyists linked to the fossil fuel industry were there, outnumbering the delegations, the individual delegations of almost every single country that's there. And there were more of them as a group, that's 1,700, than the 10 most climate vulnerable nations had in their delegations combined. So that shows how very much present and influential they are at the COP talks. So the next slide, please. They're also, as I'm sure you know and would expect, they've spent a lot of money over many, many years on lobbying for a long time now. These figures are actually from 2022, and showed that the world's 5 largest oil and gas companies spent just over $200 million lobbying to delay and block climate policy. Basically, that's what a lot of this money. They are now fighting. They've always been there, present. They are now fighting for their lives. They are obviously part of the reason they're doing this is because because of wanting to continue with the profits that they've been making. And we all know that they've been absolutely raking in the profits for a long time, but particularly recently. Last year, those 5 companies earned more than $128 billion in profits. And I forget who calculated this, but someone calculated that for the last 50 years, oil and gas companies and petrostates combined have made £2.8 billion in profit per day. So also that it's become very clear that they can't be part of the transition. If they were going to be part of the transition, we would see them acting in the way that was necessary by now. So we need something different, is what I guess the case I'm making here. And this is the case that some countries have started to make as well, that we need to think about fossil fuels differently, and we do need to now move quickly to phasing them out. So could I get the next slide, please? Because, as I said, there's at the moment there's no they're not stopping, or they're not slowing down at the in the way we need them to. There is no global agreement that covers fossil fuels, but there is a huge time pressure around climate change. So the Fossil Fuel Treaty is being proposed as a way to address this, not instead of the COP climate talks, but to complement the COP, and to actually probably to operate in a slightly different way, and in many ways to make up for some of the shortfalls of the COP process that I've mentioned already. And similar treaties have been used. I mean, we're in an emergency situation here. Similar treaties have been used in other emergency situations before, such as the threat of nuclear war. So that's what, in some ways, the idea of the treaty is of the proposal for the treaty is being based on some of those previous treaties used in emergency situations. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, oh, back one, thank you. Other treaties, some of which I'm sure you will have heard of. So the one that has, for better or worse, lent its name, it's complicated and difficult to say, name to this treaty, is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And in many ways, you can think of fossil fuels as weapons of mass destruction, in the same way the nuclear, different but similar. And certainly the 3 pillars of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty have been mapped onto this fossil fuel treaty. So not stopping the proliferation, sort of disarming ourselves from the fossil fuels we've got and making a transition. There are other elements of other treaties. One of the most successful ones apparently has been the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting substances. Some of these have there are elements of that are being now suggested for the fossil fuel treaty. So, for example, it doesn't need to have complete sign up by all countries like you have with the UN process. It can be led by smaller non-fossil fuel producing countries, and that is in fact what did happen at the very beginning. A big global civil society movement is really, really important, with momentum often being driven by cities and parliamentarians as well. And yeah, you don't need all nations. What you do need is a kind of first mover group of champion nations. So next slide, please. So these are the 3 pillars of the treaty that are being proposed, as I just mentioned. So there's the non-proliferation, so stop making the climate crisis worse by basically end the expansion and stop new coal, oil and gas production and infrastructure. Then plan a phase out of existing fossil fuel production, and then also produce a framework. So this treaty would, the other thing I should mention is that as a treaty, this would be legally binding as well, which the COP agreements aren't. So, and it would provide a framework within which everybody would operate. So then the 3rd pillar is a just transition, which is about helping countries move away from move their economies away from fossil fuels. And that would have to include technical and financial support for nations with less capacity to transition. It would probably have to include if we're talking here about fair and equitable move away from fossil fuels, which is what we have to have, then it probably has to include things like debt cancellation as well. It's being led by some of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. There's 14. Oh, actually, let's go to the next slide. More and more, there's getting more and more endorsements for this proposal. If I'd given you this talk this time last year, then the number of governments who've endorsed would have said 9, and now it says 14. There's mostly at the moment the governments that have endorsed and that are basically driving the proposal and trying to get more governments on board as well are some of the Pacific Island nations who are, whose existence is immediately threatened by sea level rise and climate change. But most recently, Colombia has joined this group as well, and they are a fossil fuel producer themselves. So that's very significant. Many cities, many subnational governments around the world, a lot of organisations. The demand is, or the call for the treaty has been taken up by Stop Climate Chaos organisations, across the board, faith organisations, human rights, all sorts, and then many individuals. And there's a growing network of parliamentarians now who are also calling for it. So let's move to the next one. My next slide, please. Thank you. So here in Scotland, what we are doing is calling on the Scottish Government to back the treaty. So based on that being an act of global solidarity with those climate vulnerable countries that are calling for the treaty, but also because as a country we got rich burning fossil fuels. And so we do bear a huge responsibility here for our historic part in the climate emergency, and the need to act first and go furthest and fastest. We're not saying this obviously is not in any way in place of all the things Scotland needs to be doing to reduce its own emissions, but this is something that we're calling on the Scottish Government to champion actually the idea of the back the proposal. We're doing this in a whole variety of different ways. Direct pressure on the First Minister through the petition hand-in, for example, that we did at the Parliament last week, that I think some of you came along to. That's those 2 pictures at the bottom of the slide there. We had some cross-party support from MSPs, and then a great gathering, a really nice gathering of all sorts of different organisations. We are going direct to MSPs, trying to put that political pressure, but they're also building pressure up through local government, for example, through councils passing motions. North Ayrshire passed a motion of support for the Fossil Fuel Treaty a couple of weeks ago. Tomorrow, Glasgow is voting on a motion to support the treaty, which we very much hope will pass. We've got youth activists on campuses trying to get the universities to back the treaty. So there's trade councils at a local level. Unison has come out and backed the treaty. The Scottish bishops last week also came out and backed the call for a treaty. So the kind of theory of change, if you like, is about building that demand through civil society, and also through the sort of layers of governance to put pressure on the Scottish Government. We also I've got colleagues working in Wales, and we're also putting pressure on the UK Government, because it actually would be the UK Government who would be the party to the treaty if they did sign up. But that doesn't mean it's not important for the subnational governments of Scotland and Wales to come out and say it. And in fact, that would add pressure to the UK government. So last slide then, please, or second to last slide, actually. So some of the things you can do are, if you get in touch with your local councillors, there's only so far Edinburgh and North Ayrshire Council who've passed motions in Scotland. So there's plenty more councils that could pass motions. We've got a campaign pack that we can share with you to help you, and we can also help you do it as well. Contact your MSPs and ask them to back the treaty. Maybe I can send things by Joanna afterwards, but there's a website where parliamentarians can add their name to the global network of that, of others who've done the same thing. And then we have a campaign pack, which you can email me and I can send you, or I can send links or share links to that. So that will be at the moment some of the main things that people can do. You can sign up to our e-news list, and then you'll find out, you'll be able to find out more as other things come up. Or if there's one of our local groups nearby to you, then please do feel very welcome to join those. We also have a monthly Zoom call for activists who are not close to any of our local groups, you know, or who are just interested in taking action. So thank you very much. That very last slide is just my contact details, but I can shall I put some of that in the chat? And I'm sorry, in my faffing around at the beginning and everything, I've now gone and overrun, so I'm going to stop right there.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Thank you so much, Liz. Apologies for messing up your slides in the end. Yeah, you can put your contacts in the chat. It will be easier, but we will be sharing, as I said, the presentation and the recording of this video. We do have another session in this series of events with Stop Climate Chaos Scotland about contacting your MSP and speaking to your MSP about climate. So maybe some of you are already experienced in doing it, but if you are not, or if you would like to invite someone that you know who is not, please invite them for that session. We will also be together with Stop Climate Chaos Scotland producing a guide after this, a resource that you could share to know how to create an ongoing relationship with your MSPs to talk about these issues. So thank you so much, Liz. Our next guest is Laura Young, also known as Less Waste Laura, who will be talking about one of her many amazing campaigns. So over to you, Laura. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Can you all hear me okay? Just need a wee thumbs up. Perfect. Well, I'll try and make up some time, but I actually will share some slides in the end because it's maybe helpful to see. But I'm going to specifically be talking about the campaign that I've been leading over the last 2 years to ban disposable vapes. Now, you might be thinking, oh, wow, we've gone from fossil fuels to a very, very niche device. However, I think there's lots of lessons that we can learn through the campaign that's been run in terms of how we campaign about all sorts of issues. And also it represents disposability, consumerism, waste of resources, and huge environmental risks. So hopefully it's still interesting for you. So I'll share some slides. I will whiz through, and I've given this presentation in 45 minutes before, so it will be quick, but hopefully it's just to kind of throw all the information at you, and it is being recorded, so you can always come back and look again. So if I could just get a thumbs up that you can see that and it's full screen, I can see all you. Perfect. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk through the campaign about disposable vapes and yeah, chat through some of the lessons and some of the things that's been going on. But to start, just in case anyone doesn't know, a disposable vape is a small throwaway device. It's an electronic item, and this is all the stuff that is jam-packed inside of it. So when we talk about these devices, we are actually talking about the first mainstream throwaway technology device with a lithium battery, with copper wires, with plastic, with metal, with all sorts of different materials. So that's what we're talking about when we say a disposable vape. And you might have seen them lying about as litter, because that's certainly how I came across them. They were invented actually 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, vapes in general, to help people quit smoking. Now, we don't have any long-term data about the impacts to health or the environment, but that's why they were first created as a smoking cessation device. And they actually started reusable, rechargeable, big refillable devices, but we have created these disposable versions in the last 3 to 4 years, and these are some of the most common types that you get, these little colourful devices, and they only cost a few pounds. And throughout this campaign, there has actually been a huge collaboration with public health. I am not going to try and go into the science of the public health side in the time that we have, but I just wanted to give a nod to the fact that this has been a collaborative cross-sector campaign where we have had health professionals, public health professionals, nurses, doctors, all sorts of people involved. And this is just a splash of the kinds of news article headlines that we've seen. So health has been absolutely crucial to this campaign and what's been involved. However, what I am going to do is take you on a whistle-stop tour of all the different environmental issues that we have seen associated with them. So here's what you're going to hear about. The first is that there is a huge amount of waste associated with these disposable little devices, and the number keeps increasing year on year every single time Material Focus, who are a recycling electronics charity, release their research. There is about 5 million thrown away every single week in the UK. 5 million every single week thrown away. And those are full of resources that we need for other technology, and we don't need to be putting them into single-use devices. So a huge amount of waste associated with these devices, and the number quadrupled from 2022 to 2023 up to that 5 million. So we know there's a huge amount of waste associated with these. And we also know litter is a problem. It's how I first came across this problem at the end of 2022. I was getting fed up picking these up as litter by the roadside, in the parks, on the beaches, everywhere. And they're not just normal litter, because we know that all litter is bad litter. They are particularly damaging when you think of everything that's jam-packed inside of them. And so at the end of 2022, I was getting fed up of finding these. So I took to social media and just said, is anybody else coming across these? I think they're a nightmare. Let's do something about them. So there is a whole host of issues associated with these. And also a quirky one. I don't know if you've seen these stickers attached to bins everywhere, but these are actually the stickers that come off the bottom of disposable vapes. So again, we're starting to see changes to our environment, all because of these silly disposable vape items. And so something that is costing councils money to come and clean up bins around city centres in particular. But we also know that these are not just a piece of litter that, you know, doesn't look nice, they also are really damaging. And the vapes on the left-hand side are actually all the same type, just at different stages of being degraded because they've been littered. One looks like it's been dropped just a few hours before I found it, others have clearly been battered around. And this is actually a local guy in Dundee who is a garage owner who came to the local paper, who'd been doing lots of stories about this campaign, talking about the countless numbers of customers he now has coming in with popped tyres because they have been running over disposable vapes, enough that he clearly thought it was an interesting story. So we are really seeing that this is a huge issue. But we also know that this is just consumerism and convenience and throwaway consumerism at its peak. And these photos were actually sent in by a guy who had been also collecting littered vapes and decided to collect them all up, and with his very clever engineering brain actually created a battery pack which he was able to use as a rechargeable battery for his e-bike. And I guess he was just wanting to creatively highlight this problem, which is we are creating products that are technically rechargeable. These lithium batteries are technically rechargeable, but of course we know that they can't be recharged if they are put into these single-use devices. We also have photographers getting photos of how these are impacting wildlife. This was a bird that is picking it up, thinking it was a shellfish, dropping it from a height, and was obviously unable to smash it open to get anything of nutritional value. So we know that these are having an impact on nature, as well as the environment and lots of other things. A lot of times though, people along the campaign have been saying, why are you campaigning to ban disposable vapes? Well, it's because recycling disposable vapes is not the answer. We should do it, we should absolutely do it, but it's not the answer. Why? Because technically disposable vapes are not 100% recyclable. There's always going to be waste associated with them that has to go to landfill. We also don't have accessible recycling points. You've probably all seen disposable vapes up for sale, but you probably haven't seen the points where you're supposed to recycle them. We also know that up to 90% of vaping manufacturers and retailers are failing to comply with the current waste regulations that we have. So we know that they are shirking around them, the fines are not good enough. And we also just don't have a proven track record when it comes to recycling. We're just not very good at it. But I did take a field trip to the only place in Scotland that actually recycles these, and I got to see the process. And if anything, I was learning that it's such a faff. They take about 5 to 10 minutes to pull one apart carefully and recycle it into its component parts. And it's not a cost-effective solution. The company that does this, Optimum Eco in Irvine, said, we don't want this to be a waste stream. This is not profitable for us. We are only doing it to be part of the greater good to try and deal with these, but actually this is not something that is a financially viable solution. So we know that recycling of these electronics is not something that we want to be encouraging. We want to be banning them and making sure that we don't have throwaway electronic devices. We also know that lithium, if you go back to chemistry in school, very explosive, very big fire risk, and we've seen that across the UK already. Hundreds of fires at waste facility sites in bin lorries, and this is actually from Angus Council, where they had to throw out all the paper and cardboard from one of their recycling trucks because it caught fire because of a disposable vape. So very, very flammable, not safe, and we need to be making sure that we are disposing of them carefully. And of course, we know we're trying to move to a circular economy, but disposable throwaway electronic devices are the complete opposite. So I've been campaigning about this over the last 2 years, and there's been lots of things that we have been doing over the past 2 years to try and raise awareness. We had amazing support from kind of grassroots level. We had lots of different organisations involved in this. When I started to put online on social media that I was getting fed up of these, I recruited lots of different organisations who wanted to help from across the environment and public health. So people like Keep Scotland Beautiful and Marine Conservation Society, Green Alliance, Public Health Scotland, Ash Scotland, lots of amazing organisations, and we were jumping on Zoom calls to try and think about what we could do. However, one of the things that was very successful about this was last year, I spent an evening emailing every single councillor in Scotland. It was as boring as it sounds. However, it definitely yielded a lot of results. So I made bespoke emails to each council, emailing every single councillor, talking about this issue, asking if they could support a ban on disposable vapes. Now, a council can't ban them, but they can push the Scottish Government to do that. And out of the 32 Scottish councils, we had 29 take this to meetings and actually approve a motion to support a ban on disposable vapes. And that was across all of these councils, and it was also cross-party. So we had every single political party championing this at the different levels, which was just fantastic. It did involve a little bit of hand-holding, a little bit of meeting with them, but it was very, very successful. You might be able to spy your council there, and if you can't, then you're one of the 3 councils that unfortunately did not support this. We also had the Scottish Youth Parliament. I think that's important to mention, that they also took this on and championed that themselves. And that was definitely something that was very successful. And the Circular Economy Minister at the time, Lorna Slater, said that receiving all of these council letters to the Scottish Government was one of the most influential things as part of the whole campaign. So our councillors do some things that are useful. There we go. This was also just from the Scottish Youth Parliament. I just wanted to give them a shout out because they actually took this on as an issue themselves. They had a huge response to the consultation they did and found that the majority of Scottish young people supported a ban. So where have we got to? Well, success. We have successfully guaranteed that the government is going to ban disposable vapes. Woohoo! And it's happening next year. So Scotland is going to be doing it on the 1st of April, and the rest of the UK is going to be doing it on the 1st of June, which is fantastic. It does mean that we have to build the legislation, so the work is not done, but at least the commitment is there, which is fantastic. And there's been lots of great things that have happened in terms of the politics and pushing things forward. We have had to fight against greenwashing. We had lots of adverts put up by the industry who were trying to sneak around and pretend that they were sustainable. These were just a few that were spotted in London, which were from Elf Bar, one of the biggest disposable vape company in the UK that sells here, saying recycling for a greener future, which is just nonsense. And so we took these adverts to the Advertising Standards Authority. Basically, you just tell on them, they go and investigate, and it was very successful because these were upheld. And so Elf Bar, the company, had to take these adverts down. They got a slap on the wrists. And finally, we had a bar set for greenwashing when it comes to vaping industries. So fantastic. And I would definitely recommend that you use the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, as a tool in your toolbox, because they have different thresholds for greenwashing. So if you see an advert, hear an advert, see anything on social media, the radio, TV, newspaper, anything at all, side of a bus, you can report that. They will investigate it. And that is a great tool in the toolbox for trying to combat greenwashing. But also, it is important just to remember to keep your correspondence as factual and as professional as possible, because if you are emailing the government, you can get FOI'd, which is something that happened to me. So all of my correspondence with the Scottish Government, all of my emails, meeting agendas, presentations, everything got FOI'd and is publicly available if anyone wants to go and see it. Now, I'm squeaky clean, so everything I had was hyperlinked, fact-checked and correct. But it's just an important thing to note that if you are getting into campaigning, particularly if you're getting into campaigning with political spaces, please just be mindful of all your correspondence and make sure you are squeaky clean. Oh, I think I'll stop there. That was probably the quickest I've spoken all morning. I'm glad I had a coffee before this. But I'll just stop there. But I just wanted to, I guess, share a few of those things. Let me actually just stop sharing my screen. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope that wasn't too quick. I hope there was some useful stuff there. But I just wanted to encourage you that this campaign basically was birthed out of nothing. And within, I think it was in under 500 days, from the first tweet that I put out sort of moaning about this to the day that the UK government committed to change, it was under 500 days. And I think that says a lot for this kind of guerrilla campaigning, just going for it, using social media, emailing people, gathering people cross-sector. So I can happily share more things about that in the Q&A, but I'll stop there because I know we're short of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was amazing. I'm really impressed with your quickness. Thank you so much for helping out with keeping us on time. We will hear now from our third speaker, Alex Lee from Friend of the Earth Scotland, who will be talking about the Peterhead campaign. And then in the end, there will be some questions for all of the speakers. So without further delay, I'm going to pass the word to Alex Lee. And thank you again so much for joining us today, Alex.
Thanks. Just a double check. How many minutes do I have?
Try to keep it under 10.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna try and share my screen. Oh, I've moved to Teams and it's absolutely terrible. And oh, share. Here we go. And I've just like completely forgotten how to use them. I have a cold, so I might sound a bit not great, but I'm going to present this to you today. So I'm going to talk a bit about our No New Gas at Peterhead campaign. We've been working on this at Friends of the Earth Scotland since around 2022, which is when the proposal to build this was put in by the developers. I thought I would do a bit of a roundup of what's happened this past year, as well as talk about sort of what we think the key points are on why this is a bad proposal. So in case you haven't heard, what is being proposed at Peterhead is a brand new gas power station. This would operate alongside the already existing power station. The existing power station is Scotland's single biggest polluter, has been for the past 5 years running. And the general rationale for building a new power station would be that there would be carbon capture and storage on it. I will explain a bit more about carbon capture and storage, also called CCS, in the next slide. But it's a very big sort of pushing point that is being uptaken by the Scottish Government and pushed by largely fossil fuel companies around the globe. Again, I don't think I need to explain a lot to people here why it's so important that we don't build a new gas-burning power station. We obviously have the twin crises of both the climate crisis and also the cost of living crisis. We know that basically developers of this power station are some of the richest companies in the country as well as the world, and people are still struggling to pay their bills and are very much locked into a volatile energy system, which means that if there is war, for example, people's bills goes right up, and we need to be moving to a renewable future. The Scottish Government are making the key decision on this. They have the final say. We know that the First Minister is going to hold a lot of decision-making power on this, but we also have the Energy Minister, Gillian Martin. We also have Mary McCallan, who is currently on maternity leave, but she does hold a position of power in this decision. And then the Acting Climate Minister right now at the end, Alistair Allen, who will all be key decision makers on this proposal. Like I said, the rationale is very much that carbon capture and storage is going to come along and magically save the day. Carbon capture and storage has been around since the 1970s, and it was proposed as a climate solution in around the 1990s. Lots of proponents of this technology are saying that it would help us meet our climate goals. However, there has been over $86 billion, much of that public money, pumped into CCS over the past 50 years with no performance increases at all. Many CCS projects claim to capture something like 90 to 95% of carbon, largely from a polluting source like a power station. They never do. There has been no power station operating anywhere in the world that is capturing carbon at the scale that SSE and Equinor, who are the developers of this project, are saying. It does not work. If we were talking, 20, 30 years and there was this potential for CCS, maybe, but CCS doesn't change anything about the energy system. It keeps power in the hands of large companies. And lots of carbon capture projects tend to be where there is already extreme pollution and extreme repression of people. Our key targets of the campaign have been the Scottish Government and then also the developers, SSE and Equinor. SSE are the lead developers on this project. However, Equinor are meant to be offering their expertise on the carbon capture side. So far in the campaign, many of you will know that we had over 40 organisations across civil society in Scotland and also organisations working in the North Sea space, urging the Scottish Government to reject the proposal to build this new gas power station. I'm very sorry if you don't see your logo on this page. I could not fit all 44 of them in. But there was a cross-sectoral push for this. We had fuel poverty organisations, environmental organisations, climate organisations, and financial organisations as well. We have also found an increasing skepticism towards the project to do with the environmental impact, which is something that isn't talked about a lot with carbon capture. Some of you might have seen, and I'll post it in the chat, the recent expose by the Ferret that shows that carbon capture projects and licenses have been given to organisations that would build in marine protected areas, basically in the North Sea, at huge destructive cost to wildlife there. We have also, and this kind of links to what Laura was saying actually, we also, with a fine-tooth comb, went through the lobbying register and submitted a number of FOIs to see how companies were engaging with the Scottish Government around this project. On the bottom left here, this is our previous First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, who is actually visiting Peterhead there, wearing SSE gear, walking around the project. Now, some of you might know that decision makers aren't meant to be visiting sites that they claim to not be biased on. So the proposal was already in and he was walking around Peterhead and saying very publicly, this is a great idea. And we put in a complaint to the Scottish Government about this, that this shows clear bias to the planning decision. There were another 27 breaches of ministerial code around this project, largely meetings where SSE and Equinor were speaking to MSPs and key decision makers and then not noting that they were meeting them or not putting in full information. Liz mentioned the proliferation of fossil fuel companies in decision-making spaces. We also saw this year that there were 480 carbon capture and storage representatives in the COP29 space. So there is a huge push now from industry into both national and global government and decision-making spaces on climate, really pushing carbon capture and storage. We also handed in a petition earlier on this year. We understand that petitions themselves don't get stuff done. However, it does allow us to make the campaign very public. It puts a lot of pressure on the Scottish Government if you get that news. And there was a huge push for the Scottish Government to say no to this terrible expansion plan. We've also been targeting Equinor. We very much situate ourselves in the wider fossil fuel movement. There is lots of things going on in the fossil fuel movement across Scotland, and there's a lot of overlap, right? So you'll see at the top that we also work very closely with Stop Rosebank and also the Stop Equinor campaign. to draw the links between projects and polluters and how this is a global problem. It's not just a one project problem. So we're very much trying to focus on making links across movements. We've also been targeting SSE. We attended the AGM this year. Some of you might know the North Sea Knitters, who are an incredible group of women who knit their way around the country targeting varying dodgy fossil fuel projects. They went in and disrupted the AGM and read out a very impassioned and very well-written statement about why fossil fuels basically shouldn't be part of SSE's portfolio. At the bottom here, this is them speaking to, they visited SSE actually, and they went in and spoke to the developers. Here, some of the nice SSE, these women were lovely. They were very lovely, but we had a very nice conversation with them about their plans. There has been a lot of wonderful self-organizing. Part of the work that we do is insider, but we also do a lot of outsider, supporting activists, mobilizing, and local organizing. These aren't necessarily related just to the Peterhead campaign, but some of you will recognize varying people in these pictures who have been flyering about fossil fuels in general, weaving in Rosebank, weaving in the work that Liz was talking about Peterhead, talking about the phasing out of fossil fuels more generally across Scotland. This is the knitters up here who, I don't know how, very wonderfully managed to accost the First Minister and talk to him about fossil fuels and say, don't do this. Yeah, they're very charming and very switched on and managed to get into some wonderful spaces about this stuff. The bottom photo, and I know people from XR are in this call, is people outside of Parliament urging the Scottish Government to reject the proposal. At the same time, Patrick Harvey of the Scottish Greens was talking, was raising a question actually at First Minister Questions about the proposal to build this and how it should be rejected. So it was very beautiful timing. And towards the end of the year, we have launched some research into the real climate impact of the Peterhead project. This was actually sparked by a very fantastic man called Andrew Boswell, who some of you might know. He is based in England, and he's just a regular guy who happens to launch a lot of legal cases against governments to try and stop them doing bad things. He has been targeting roads and the building of motorways, but he decided to look at the environmental impact assessment of a carbon capture storage project in the north of England, in the Teesside area. And he went through this environmental impact assessment, which had been actually submitted by Equinor, and was like, oh, these numbers don't add up. Equinor have double counted lots of this, and this doesn't make any sense. And he raised this with the UK government. And after a very long process, they admitted that, yes, actually, the numbers had been fudged and they weren't correct. And he is now taking the UK government to court over this particular project. This got us thinking, wait, these are the same developers of the Peterhead project. Let's have a look at their environmental impact assessment. And surprise, surprise, the numbers weren't right. So the research found that the Peterhead power station could actually be responsible for 1 million more tons of CO2 and up to 5 times worse for climate than the developers have actually said. This is a bit of a techie graph, but basically the environmental impact assessment was found to have 3 key missing pieces of information. The first was that the developers had said that the power station was going to be on 100% of the time and that CCS would be working 100% of the time. SCCS are an energy provider. They frankly should know that there will be times of maintenance and outages that happen when you're running a power station. So they had just had it working for 100% of the time. They also hadn't factored in upstream emissions, which relate to the extraction and transportation of natural gas. This means that there is a very real risk that the Peterhead power station would completely operate on imported gas, largely from fracked gas from the USA and Qatar. And as I was saying earlier, SSE have accounted for 90% of carbon to be captured from this site. However, upon further scrutiny, we found that there are no CCS gas power sites operating anywhere in the world, and there's a pilot project 1/20th the size of what's being promised to Peterhead. So we did some modelling basically and factored in these things that were missing and found that yes, if you were to include these very important bits of information, the Peterhead power station, which is already very bad, would be up to 5 times worse. So how to get involved? We will be doing a civil society sign-on statement, urging the Scottish Government to get the developers, SSE and Equinor, to redo their environmental impact assessment. We know that at a previous project where they had been urged to do this, that it took them 2 months to redo their environmental impact assessment, and this allows us to buy more time in a campaigning space to think of new tactics. It also allows us to see, you know, that accountability for the developers. We will be doing a webinar on the research and on this statement on the 26th of November. Obviously, I just had to do a very, very quick sort of, here are the key things that have come out of that research, but it's quite complex, and there are some really great bits to hear about, and I will put the link to that webinar in the chat. Please email me to join the campaign mailing list to get updates. If you want to come to events, if you want to plan things, if you want flyers to talk about this on a stall that you're running, just let me know, and we can sort that out for you. Like everybody else has been saying, please bring it up to MSPs and decision makers. It's actually very, very useful to attend surgeries and to speak to these decision makers in real time and to urge them to really scrutinize this project. We have found actually that going and speaking to them, also calling them, you can call them. It's very good to talk to them on the phone. If you have that fear about getting through to somebody on the phone, you can call them at night and then you can leave a message, which I have found very, very useful if you've got that fear of doing it. And yes, please come along to events. Obviously, it's the end of the year, so there's not much going on, but we will be doing lots more in the new year, and in collaboration with other organisations that I've mentioned. And I think I have managed to stay under 10. I've not seen the time. Yeah, done.
Thank you so much, Alex. We only have about 5 minutes for questions. I mean, these lunchtime sessions they run really fast. So yeah, please, if you have a question, either raise your hand or pop it in the chat. I think that all of the speakers, Liz, Alex and Laura, were quite detailed in some advice that they have. But if there's anything that they didn't cover, they would like to ask about their campaigns or suggestions, please do raise your hand now or put a question in the chat. Just a note, the recording will be shared after you. So if there's anything about their presentations they didn't catch, you will be able to watch it again and like stop the video and take that information. So any questions before we wrap up? Yes, Alison?
Hi, sorry, I was trying to type it. It's going to take too long. Alex, I just wanted to ask, I live quite near to Peterhead. I'm in Fyvie in Aberdeenshire. This is kind of important to me. Has there been any attempt to divert the Scottish Government away from the gas and oil, but into renewables, being as Peterhead is on the shore of a very big sea with lots of wave power potential, as well as it's the place where we've had huge developments in transformers going up around here to take the new electricity from wind power as well. So is there any chance of adding that into the campaign?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good one. I didn't have time to talk about this, but I will say we have 3 local organisers who work in and around the northeast. We have 2 people. We have one person who lives in Aberdeen, one in Peterhead, and we also have a local community organiser who lives in Bodham. Now, Bodham is a small village, as you know, Alison, that literally the power station towers over people's houses. Her name is Michelle. Yeah, she lives there, and she organises in the local community. I would say that we do often talk about the other solutions that we have, right? Like we're finding that you can't just say, no, don't do this thing. You have to provide an alternative future. You very much have to articulate that. And we do talk about a just transition in renewables. And I would say that the Scottish Government really talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk when it comes to that. They unfortunately do have a very clear piece of policy that supports carbon capture. They're very much taken in by it. So often if you say, you don't need to do this, you can do renewables instead, they kind of see it as a, we can do both, instead of putting the sort of that policy support and all of that funding into renewables instead. They kind of split the pot, which is very unfortunate. Sorry, Alison, that's not more joyful.
Thank you, Alex. And Johnny, you have a question?
Yes, it's not actually to do with the presentations, which were all absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. There's a link to a feedback form in the chat. Are you wanting attendees here to fill that in?
Oh, yes. I was going to say that before we wrap. So there's a few links that I put in the chat of feedback forms for this event, and also other SCAN related links that might be useful for you of future events and our channels. So sorry about that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Johnny?
You could just let people know how to save the chat in case they're not sure. And then
So I will email you after this event. You will receive an email with a transcript of the chat, a recording of the session, and other resources from Stop Climate Chaos Scotland and from us, SCAN. David?
So today we've been talking about campaigning against things and how very successful that middle one was. Congratulations, Laura. But there is also further investigation, further exploration about what alternatives there are to gas heating, for instance. And so I encourage everybody who's listening today to look out for the Heat in Buildings bill, which is going to be a bill which the Scottish Government has promised, has been consulting on for years, about how we actually transition not just the power stations, but our homes, and how we reduce the energy waste from our homes and then provide the heat from, it could be if you're a rural, from heat pumps, but if you're in the town or in a built-up area, it might need to be from heat networks. So heat in buildings bill will be very important, and I think I encourage us all to look out for that and bone up on it and think about the opportunities in your own community for campaigning for what is very countercultural. It's a different way of doing it, done in Paris, in Denmark, and so on and so on. But heat networks might be a solution that I encourage you to look out for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I put a link there in the chat from ChangeWorks. They have a good explanation of what the bill is if you want to check. And just one more event suggestion on the topic of energy, in this case, community energy. Some of these topics might come up. If they don't, you can bring them in as well. So it's an evening event that we have on the 3rd of December, and that's the last SCAN event of the year. So if community energy and energy is something that interests you, consider joining this session, and you can also bring something to share. So so I'm going to wrap here. We're already 1 minute after, so apologies for keeping you here for 1 minute. After that, thank you again so much, Liz, Laura, and Alex, and everyone for coming today. This was a great energetic lunchtime event, and thanks for everyone who contributed with your questions. Look out for the email that you'll receive until the end of the week with these resources. And thanks again, Fiona, back in Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, for co-organizing these events. I hope to see you next week at our How to Speak to Your MSP About Climate or any other future events. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day. Thanks.